Getting good at drawing portraits is hard, which is probably why you're here. But don't worry, because I'll show you all the steps to go from drawing what could only be described as barely a face to something like this. And not just how I recommend doing it, but also like what to practice along the way to make sure that you get the best result as fast as possible and impress your crush. So everything starts with a portrait reference. Here's mine to start. So getting the right reference is going to be the first step. And obviously, like if you're more experienced, go ahead and just pick whatever you want. But if you're not, I would highly advise against, grabbing faces that are in any kind of perspective. Faces are hard enough to draw, like adding perspective to the mix is just going to make things much more complicated. Save that for later when you've leveled up a bunch. Now, this next step you can skip if you feel like you don't really need it. But if you want to make your life much easier and actually improve your reference like significantly in terms of readability, there's a couple of adjustments that we can make to this photo. The first thing would be to make it black and white, so there's no colors whatsoever, to confuse your brain, to bamboozle you, and then we can play around with the levels a little bit here to increase the contrast a bunch and get rid of as much shading information as possible. We want something that's as close as possible to a line drawing almost, because that's going to be super helpful when we get started with the sketch. But yeah, with this, we should be able to observe the facial features a lot more easily without being distracted by a bunch of other information that we really don't need right now. Now, let's start sketching. Now, it really does help to know the basic head proportions here, but I show that in other videos already, so I'll just link those down in the video description. Feel free to check those out. But for what we're doing here, it's not entirely necessary. So the key thing here will always be to go from big shapes to smaller shapes. So I'm just starting here with the overall shape for the head. Very, very low details. I'm using mostly straight lines because those are, easier to draw, a little faster as well. And as I look at my photo reference, I'm trying to abstract as much information out as I possibly can. So what's good to understand here is that there's no right method. You just try to do your best looking at this and looking for landmarks, relationship between different shapes. So right off the bat, when I'm looking at her face, I see this shape right here, which is this very rounded rectangle, right? If I round out the edges, boom, look what we have here. We have basically the shape of her face. So that's kind of what I started with here. And then it would be tempting to work on the face just yet, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to look at the overall shape of her hair, trying to simplify it again because it's very complex. There's a lot of details here, but trying to see straight lines as much as you can. So I'm looking at this side here. You can almost trace a line, like a perfectly straight line this way. The top of her hair, kind of the same idea. You can kind of simplify or average all of these details into this one line here. On the side of the hair here, almost another perfectly straight line. And then going all the way back to the neck, we kind of have this subtle curve here, but mostly straight once again. And then real quick, let's add the neck in there just to see how we can simplify those lines, so maybe something like this. And so what I'm going to be trying to do here on my side is recreating essentially those same lines that I just traced over this reference. And if you're new to this, I highly, highly recommend that you actually draw on top of your reference photo to really get familiarized with what you're working with. Let's add another curve here to kind of wrap up the hair shape. And now that we have kind of our big shapes laid down, I would move on to the medium shapes, trying once again to find kind of landmarks that will help me position these without the reference underneath guiding me. Because of course the whole point is to draw this again, but over there, not tracing it. Now, the next thing that I think makes the most sense is to always look at the eyes and how they're positioned in comparison to the rest of the head shape. Where are the eyes? Are they about halfway in the middle? Maybe the top of the eyelids here is about halfway. Yeah, so that would be a good landmark, right? So then I know if I go back to my head here and measure kind of the whole height of the head, I know that right down the middle here is where the top of the eyelid is going to land. I have sort of an idea where they'll be positioned vertically. Now let's try to, figure out where they are on this axis here, horizontally. So once again, I have my face shape here, kind of like this soft rectangle. So let's split that in half and see where things land. We can observe here that the corner of this eye is about in the middle. So I would say right at the quarter line here. And then for the other eye, it's just a little off the side of our rectangle here. And then as is convenient with, typical anatomy, we're going to have in between the eyes another eye's width. So we can kind of split the distance between the corner of the eyes here in 3 parts, 3 equal parts. And that should really give us a pretty accurate representation of the position of our eyes. horizontally. So looking back here at the eyes, we can see kind of this round ellipse shape formed by the upper eyelids and lower eyelids. We know where the upper eyelid lands. We have this line already here that we've identified. So we can kind of just draw these rough circles here. That should give us kind of the little capsules into which the eyes are going to be resting. Now, if we look at the space below that, you know, what's left? I think the first landmark here that would stand out to me would be the upper lips. Really, that's going to be perfectly centered in the middle of the space that we have left below the eyes. And then from that line all the way to the bottom of the lips is about the same distance as we have to the bottom of the nose. And going back to our face rectangle here, we know the mouth and the nose are going to be a little offset to the left because, of course, she's not facing us directly. But thanks to those lines, it should be relatively easy to position the nose because we know like the right nostril is going to be past the center line just a little bit. And then the other nostril lands right about the quarter mark again if we subdivide this vertically. And even though this doesn't look super impressive right now, because I've used all those reference points, I should feel pretty confident that what I've constructed here is fairly accurate to the reference. So now maybe one more thing we could do is identify the eyebrows. Happens to land on this one line right here. And then look at that. We have kind of from this corner here, almost a straight line, another line here, and then it goes down a bit past the corner of the eyes. And honestly, the hardest part is done. The way I analyze the face and its features is just one of an infinite ways to do it. This just happens to be the guidelines that stood out to me first, but each face will be different and each one of you will probably find like different reference points. It's just really the order in which I did it that matters the most. So yeah, I wanted to go through the process live with you so that you could see my thought process, because from here on out, like we'll be doing exactly the same thing, but on a smaller scale, like for each facial features instead of the face as a whole. And of course, eventually this exercise can be completely skipped. You know, like if you get good enough, you'll be able to do this in your head on the fly as you're sketching the final sketch like I'm doing now. So to wrap this up, obviously this needs a little bit of work still, but from this point on, with the first layer set at a lower opacity, I'll just be drawing a clean version on a new layer, and I'll just use what we've done so far as a reference point. But for this step, we'll need to decide if a certain line can be implied or if it needs to be fully drawn. I think that's going to be the main thing to do here. For example, the upper eyelid folds are pretty bold lines, so we'll want to use full lines for those, but the lower eyelids are more subtle, so like a less solid line might work best. Same with the nose, where on one side the transition from light to shadow creates a clear line, but on the left side that line is basically invisible, so we don't really need to draw it out. We can just kind of suggest it by focusing on the parts where there's more contrast, like around the nostrils and as it curves into the eyebrows. And I want to keep things here feeling like a drawing, like I don't want to shade this, I don't want this to turn into a painting. So for the most part, I'll be ignoring the shading, but I will focus on like the smallest shadows, or what you would call the occlusion shadows, like stuff where the light gets trapped like in the nostrils, or in the crack of the mouth, in the ears, in between like big strands of hair, that kind of stuff. And for stuff like the big obvious shadows like around the nose again, what I'll do instead of filling it in is basically just draw the outline of it. So like suggesting where the shadow should be, but not really drawing it. Because all the shading stuff, that would be for a different class. And now to make this pop, let's highlight the contour of her face by darkening the background a little bit. And boom, you know, kind of a simple drawing. But because we set out our guidelines really carefully initially, I think it came out looking pretty similar. And it's a drawing, so here less is more, right? There's not a whole lot that I drew here, but by carefully placing a couple of lines only, we can get a pretty decent result. At least I think. All right, and before I start the next demo, I'll be drawing this guy, by the way. Look at that face. How could I not? I got the photo from this book, Least Wanted. Highly recommend it if you can get a hold of one. They're pretty rare. It's basically a bunch of old school mugshots. It's really a goldmine of super interesting faces. But yeah, like I said, before we get into the second demo, just a quick word from our sponsor, me. I know I've been speedrunning how to draw portraits because, I gotta follow the YouTube pace and keep engagement up. But teaching how to draw the head, the face, and the entire anatomy of the body actually is just one of the many topics that we cover in my art school program that you can find more information about down in the video description. It's a complete university equivalent curriculum, although I'd argue it's much better. And you can get it for still a massive discount as we're extending the summer sale for a little while longer. You get lifetime access to all the content, exercises, a week-by-week guide to hold your hand through everything so you always know what to work on next, and of course, private access to our school's Discord to level up with a ton of other students sharing the same interests. It's the best value for the money you will ever find, so I don't want you to miss out on this if you've needed the extra help with your art, and it's my proudest work yet. Alright, now let's get this second demo going. I'll let it play in the background since I'll just be doing the exact same thing, but hopefully it helps to see it done again with a different model. Don't hesitate to slow it down too, by the way, if it's going a little too fast. Let's roll it. So what are we thinking? Did this help? Let me know in the comments. Like anything, the more you practice this stuff, the easier it'll get. Kind of expected, to be drawing some sort of alien monsters initially. But as long as you take your time, carefully observing your references, spotting some of the different guidelines that we looked at today, focusing on little improvements from one portrait to the next, you should be able to draw some pretty decent portraits soon enough. And then some great ones if you don't give up. From here though, since you're more familiar with how to draw faces now, I think you'll enjoy my class on drawing simple faces from imagination. I show my entire method and it's actually a little simpler than what we did today, so I'm pretty sure you'll be able to follow along. The link to it should pop up on screen at any moment now. I'll see you there.